Hello, this is Houston, and in this video we are going to talk about Mesh. More specifically, to try to help you to do something cool on your first assignment. And I would like to make this very clear. If you don't feel comfortable with this tool, if you think that this is very difficult to use or complicated, you can do your assignment just using the tools I already showed on our last class. Just duplicating things, using duplicate special. You can choose to do whatever you want. So you are not forced to use this. I'm showing this because I truly believe that, first of all, this is a very interesting tool to improve your production and to kind of push the boundaries a little bit. And it's a tool that allows a lot of experimentation. So you will be able to create very interesting things if you put together all the knowledge that we have so far about the tool or about the other tools, and about the use of Maya or on how to create simple objects and how to duplicate objects. But again, you are not forced to use this thing. Okay, just to be clear, this is relative to the third week, and we already saw a lot of things related with modeling. On our last class, we talked about groups, snaps, duplicates and duplicate special. We also saw some modeling tools like separate, detach, combine, extrude. I explained how to use this thing. So for example, extrude is super cool to solve the problem of one-sided polygons. Like I explained about normals, and I explained that the polygons just have one side and the other side is usually black. So Maya shows the other side as black. But we usually do not have the back side of the polygons. So one way to solve this kind of thing is if you want custom shapes, you can have the custom shapes. You just have to use extrude to create a little bit of thickness. So this is a very cool tool to not only create new geometry, but also create thickness on very thin objects. I talk about separate, detach, and combine. I showed you very quick some deformation tools, and I gave you a very fast introduction about Mesh. And this is the focus of this video. I would like to show things here that I didn't have time to show during the class. Okay, and that's my focus today. So just so you know, I'm going to start talking about something very, very important. Every time we start a new project in Maya, we should organize our project. And there is a way to do that. This is very common on every single 3D software. Some softwares, they have this feature to pack everything inside the same file. Like Blender, for example, you don't have to worry about creating a project because Blender tries to put everything inside the same file. But this is not true when it comes to 3D in general. So we have to set a folder on our computer, and then the software, the 3D software, is going to put everything inside this folder. Like all the textures, all the other files. If we render a movie, for example, which by the way is usually done using a sequence of files. We produce a sequence of files and we bring this sequence of files inside a compositing software like After Effects or Nuke or whatever. We usually have to set this folder to have a place to put these files inside. And that's the main topic about setting projects. And right after that, I'm going to start explaining about Mesh. So let's dig in. To set a project, we just have to go to File, Project Window. Actually, there's two menus here. They are a little bit different. Every time we start a new project, we use the first option, Project Window. If you click here, this window here is going to open up, and Maya is going to ask two main things. First of all, the name of the project. You just have to click here in new, and he's going to ask, okay, what is the name of the project? So in this case, I'm going to put a very suggestive name here. So MASH, okay. You can use spaces, you can use special characters, but again, let me advise you to not do that, because Maya inside Windows works pretty well with special characters and this kind of thing. But sometimes we use, like me, for example, I use Maya on my Mac, and I also use Maya on Linux. And sometimes Maya do not work very well with special characters and spaces, but this is not Maya's fault. This is has something to do with the operational system, and sometimes we might find problems, and to avoid those problems, I would like to advise you not to use special characters at all, okay? Instead of spaces, you can use underline, you can use lowercase, uppercase, whatever. Long names, short names. I again advise you to not use very long names. Use descriptive names, but not long names. Okay. The second thing that you have to tell Maya is in which folder do you want to save this thing. So usually he points to the default folder, which by the way is inside Documents, Maya, Projects. Okay. You can put this thing whatever you want. So usually I work inside Google Drive. I put this project inside Google Drive or Dropbox or any other streaming file service, so I can access this thing using other computers in the future. Okay, you don't have to do that if you work locally. You just have to move this folder later on, and you can have access to this folder on another computer. Okay. But just so you know, this is a very common practice. And you see that inside the projects folder, Maya will create this folder here, okay? And just so you know, you just have to define which folder Maya should create your project. And Maya is going to use the folder to save a folder with this name. And inside this folder, Maya is going to create a bunch of other folders. You don't have to touch on those things. This is extremely important, okay? Just keep in mind that those names, they can change. If you want to change, you can, but I strongly advise you not to do that. But again, it's your project, so you can do whatever you want. But just so you know, I always use the default names. And they have very specific meaning. So, for example, all our files, the Maya files, the Maya scenes, we save the files inside scenes folder. All our textures, they are usually saved inside source folders. And our render files, they are rendered and they are saved inside images folder. Okay, so just so you know, Maya tries to organize everything, and everything we do, Maya tries to separate those things inside those folders. And why this thing is so important to us? Because when we work on a project, so for example, we are going to work with textures eventually, and if you have to bring a lot of textures, they are external files, they are not inside Maya. Maya just makes a reference to a external file. Okay, Maya needs to know that those files, they live on a very specific place. So when you create a project and Maya create this source folder, every time you try to use a texture inside this project, Maya is going to point to that specific folder, to the source images folder. Okay, so if you put your textures inside this folder, and if you try to bring the textures to apply on a object and do whatever, Maya is going to look to this specific folder. Okay, one second piece of information, this is extremely important. Okay, you are seeing a absolute path here. okay? And this is going to be the last time you are going to see a absolute path if you set a project, okay? So when you create a project, Maya is not going to look to see users, Houston documents, whatever. Maya is not going to look to those things anymore. He doesn't care where this folder lives on your computer. He's just going to look to those folders here, okay? He ignores the absolute path and he uses the relative path to search for the files that he's going to use, okay? Just keep that in mind. This is super important. And let's create the project using the default settings. I just changed the name. I'm going to use the default path, so you can save this thing whatever you want. I really don't care, okay? And if you hit accept, looks like that nothing happens, but it happens, okay? If you try to save this file now, for example, I'm just going to save the file, you will see that right away Maya is going to try to save this file inside the scenes folder, inside the folder that Maya creates for this project, inside the projects folder. So this is the path that where you save the projects. This is the name of the project, and this is the name of the scenes file. So by the way, this is super important. Maya usually have two types of native files, I would say. Again, this is Maya files, okay? He works with this ASCII file and binary file. The difference between ASCII and binary is super fast to read, and the extension for binary files is .mb, okay? The extension for Maya ASCII files is .ma, okay? The only difference between both is Maya ASCII files, you can open up the Maya ASCII files using a text editor. And that is a very specific use for that. If you want to know, I can explain during the classes. But Maya binary file, it's a binary computed file, so it's fast to read, fast to save. But if something goes wrong with this file, you cannot open this file anymore. So you probably lose your job. So there's no problems if you are working on a very simple scene. Sometimes working with binary is better. Most of the time, work with binary is totally fine. And Maya kind of leads you to use binary instead of ASCII. Okay, but using ASCII, you have some advantages. So for example, one of the advantages is if you have Maya 2022, which is my case, and you want to open up this file on Maya 2019, for example, you can't, because by default, Maya do not allow you to do that. But if you want to force Maya to open up this file, you can open up this Maya ASCII file, change the version of Maya used to save this file, and you can trick Maya to open older files, okay? This is a trick, of course. This is not even at the documentation, Autodesk documentation, but we usually do this kind of thing when we work on productions and we have to open up files on older versions, which by the way is something that can happen. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen, okay? But ASCII have also a huge disadvantage, which is the size of the file. Since the file is not a binary format, it's usually 2 or 3 times bigger than the binary file. So eventually, if you are working on a very large scene and not optimized scene, you will face problems of, you know, saving this file or taking a long time to saving the files. Okay, just pointing out that this is the way we create projects. Okay, here I am inside Windows Explorer, Documents, Maya folder, and inside this Maya folder I have the projects folder. Okay, so this is the folder where I set my project, and this is the folder of the project itself. When you open up this folder, you will see that Maya populates this folder with a bunch of other folders. All of them are empty. Okay, there's absolutely nothing inside. We are going to use this thing when you know, we are working inside the project itself. So here is the scene files, where we put our scenes, the main Maya files. Here is the source images. As I said, the source images have our textures, okay? Is the place where we put our textures to work. And this is the images file. You can save the Maya rendered images here. And we also have the assets file. So inside assets, for example, I used to put my other meshes and other things that I bring from other softwares inside my project, my current project, okay? Just so you know, there is also this file here, workspace.mel. If you open up this file using, for example, let me see, a text editor like Notepad, you will see that this is a file that have a lot of settings about my project. Okay, so for example, he is saying that the images folder is going to be saved on the images folder, and so on. We have all the settings, all the basic settings for our project. It's kind of complicated to understand, but if you look carefully, you see that Maya is not using the absolute path anymore. He's using just the relative path to point to the folders. Okay, so just so you know, the second thing I would like to show is how to set a project. So let's suppose that you are working at the university. So you create this folder. You just have to take this folder, copy to your hard drive or to another media, and you put this folder on your computer, let's suppose. So if that's the case, you need to tell Maya that you want to work with that project. So it's kind of common. So I work on several projects at the same time. Okay, so sometimes I have to shift from one project to another project. So the way to do that, the way to tell Maya that now I'm going to work on this specific project, is going to Maya and using the option File, Set Project. Okay, so once again, when we create a new project, we use the project window. When we set a project and we tell Maya, oh, now we are going to work on that specific project. You can have like multiple folders with projects on your computer, but you can work with one project at a time. Okay, so you just have to click Set Project, and Maya is going to ask, okay, which folder should I set as the current project? You don't have to go inside the folder, okay? You just have to select that folder and click Set. When you do that, Maya is going to understand that you want to work with that specific project. So keep that in mind. Every time we start a new project, we use the File, Project window, okay, and you click New and you create the name of the project. You set the folder, try to use the default folders, okay, and you hit Accept, and Maya is going to create this folder, which is the name of the project, inside this path here for you, with those folders inside this folder here. And you can work with this project from now on. If you want to change the project, if you want to work on a different project, you have to set the project. So File, Set Project, select the folder and hit Set, and that's it. Now that we already talked about how to set projects, how to deal with folders, and now I would like to focus on Mesh. So first of all, what is Mesh? So Mesh is a very powerful tool inside Maya to create motion graphics. And the way Mesh works is basically trying to replicate objects in sequence and trying to do things with those objects. So it's a very, very powerful system. It's a plugin that comes with Maya, so you don't have to pay extra money to that. So just so you know, this is something extremely powerful and super common. So for example, there's a software called Cinema 4D. I think you already know that. And inside Cinema 4D, we have this feature called MoGraph. It's one of my favorite tools. I really, really enjoy this tool very much. Now I would like to show you a little bit about Mesh, how to set Mesh, how to work with networks, and how to create cool stuff. So let's jump into Maya and start working. To access Mesh, we can do a bunch of things. First of all, the obvious thing is to use the shelf options, but just so you know, you can go to animation and you will see Mesh here, and you can also access effects, menu set, and you see Mesh here. Okay, if you're not seeing Mesh, it's probably because the plugin is not loaded, so you need the plugin. Okay, you have to go to Window, Settings and Preferences, and then Plugin Manager. So all Maya features, they are usually in the form of plugins. So everything that Maya have, so most of the features that Maya have, with the exception of the internal features, of course, they are plugins. Okay, so you just have to look here on this search bar for MASH, and you'll see Mesh, and you have to choose those two options. Okay, loaded and auto load. Okay, if you do that, Mesh is going to load like every time, and you will see this option here. Okay, looks like that we don't have a bunch of things, but we have. Okay, it's quite simple to start. You just have to create a simple object. So let's start with a polygon cube, which is a very simple thing to start. And then you can create your mesh network using this button here, or using mesh, create mesh network. But before we jump right into this thing, I would like to show you something cool. Okay, if you just select the thing and create, Mesh is going to automatically do a bunch of things here. First of all, your original cube is going to be hidden here. Everything that is gray is hidden. Okay, you have to pay attention to that. The way we hide or show objects, by the way, so if you go to polymodeling, just to give you an example, okay? If you want to hide or show objects, you just have to select the object and go and type H, okay? And if you do that, your object is going to disappear from the scene, so you cannot select on the scene anymore, but the object is here on your outliner. So this is the case of the main cameras, the default cameras, and this is what happened with your object. If you want to bring your object back, you just have to select the object and hit H again, and you can bring the object back. So very, very simple. Just so you know, this is one way to create Mesh, but this is probably not the best way. If you want to access the settings, you just have to select the main node, the main Mesh node, and then go to the attribute editor, and you have access to all the nodes and all the things you can do with this guy. Okay, but instead of that, I also would like to show you other settings. They are very important settings. Oh, by the way, we also have a interface. If you go here to workspace, you have this mesh workspace, but this mesh workspace is very related with animation because, again, this is a animation tool, although we are using this tool for doing modeling thing. Okay, so in this case, I would like to start all over again. So File, New. We are going to stick with our default, our general workspace. So reset, so everything is new once again. Okay, the way you create mesh is basically like that. So you can select an object, a starting object, to go to the mesh menu, but instead of just clicking here or on your shelf, I would like to point out this thing here. If you click here, you will see a bunch of options. The first option is you can create a geometry type mesh or instancer. Okay, there's some differences between both. If you are working with dynamics, which by the way is something that Mesh is pretty capable of doing as well. What I mean by dynamics is simulation. So for example, falling objects, smashing objects, breakable objects. You can construct like walls with bricks and you can break this wall with bricks. It's super cool. If we have time, I promise, and if we have time and if you have curiosity, of course, I promise that I can show this thing to you, okay, in the future. Just ask me and I will do that gladly. So I advise you to use Instancer. By default, Mesh tries to use Mesh geometry type because of the dynamic features. Okay, but if we use Instancer, we can have a a better way to deal with geometry, like heavy geometry. If you have the intention to have like millions of objects on your scene, try to think about that. Using Instancer is probably the best idea. Okay, but let's suppose that you decided to use Mesh. I'm going to show you how to change the geometry type after you create your network. Okay, when you create your network, Mesh is going to add a distribution node automatically for you. I'm going to show you what this means, and you will see that the distribution nodes have some behaviors. We can of course change the behavior, but by default he's going to replicate objects on a line. Is going to take the object and replicate several times. Okay, if you apply and close, we're going to use the standard settings. If you want to change the geometry type, you just have to go to Mesh. I think you have to select the node. You have to go to Mesh Utilities, and here we have Switch Mesh Geometry Type, and now we have a Mesh Instancer. If you select the Mesh node and go there, you can change once again geometry, and you will see that this is a repro mesh. The icon is a little bit different, okay? Because this is like working with copies or working with instances, okay? So try to think about that. There's some limitations on working with instance instead of mesh. So my advice to you is, if your machine is good enough and handles a lot of geometry, you can work with repro mesh. It's totally fine. If you find problems, you can go back to the main node, to the mesh node, and then Mesh Utilities, Switch Mesh Geometry Type. So this is the first thing. I'm going to work with the basic one, just to be on the safe side. Okay, the repro mesh, I'm working, by the way, again, I'm working with mesh geometry type, but if you want, you can work with Instancer. Okay, how this thing works, as I said, you just have to select here, go to your attribute editor. By the way, Control A, shift between attribute editor and channel box. Okay, everything happens with the attribute editor, but Mesh also have another window. Okay, it's important to know that. If you go to Mesh, we have this Mesh editor here, and this is like a very specialized outliner. You will see your mesh node, the main node here, and you will see all the nodes or all the things that are really working here, all the things that you apply, you know, you can select then here and you can enable or disable those nodes. Okay, you can enable or disable everything at once. This is one of the advantages of using this guy. But let me show you another very cool thing. By default, you are not seeing all the mesh stuff. Okay, it looks like that you are seeing everything, but you are not seeing everything. So for example, if we select mesh here, you will see that we have the distribute node and we have this mesh repro thing. Okay, our objects, they live here. So if you want to work with more than one object, you have to bring the object from your outliner to this list here, and then mesh is going to consider both meshes. So right now I just have one mesh, which is the P cube. Okay, so think about that. Another thing is I can configure my outliner to work with mesh on a very practical way. He's going to ignore everything except the mesh nodes. First of all, you can go to show objects, and here we have a bunch of filters. So everything we activate here is the only things that outliner is going to show. Okay, so for example, I just want to see mesh stuff. So if I click here, I'm just going to see mesh stuff, but I'm not seeing everything right now. To see really everything, you have to go to display and deactivate this option, sorry. If you deactivate this option here, you will see truly all the mesh nodes. So now we have the mesh repro, we have the distribute, and we have mesh the main node. Okay. In this case, you can still use this guy if you want. You can drag this to one of the sides and put here just in case you want to access those things, because using the mesh editor, you can, as I said, activate or deactivate things. You can double click to rename. You can do a lot of things with this window. So I'm going to use both. And here in the middle is the result of the things we do. So I would like to start explaining the main nodes and using some nodes to play a little bit with mesh. So you can use whatever you want, okay? So you can go here, you can use whatever you want. But keep in mind that most of the nodes, they make no sense right now, because they are meant to be used for motion graphics. They're meant to be used for animations, okay? So if you start working with something and do not understand what this thing does, there's a help about mesh. I'm going to put this link on Moodle, so you will have access to what every single node is doing. So you will know for sure what single node is doing, and you can experiment with them. But I'm going to work with basically 2 nodes here, maybe 3 or 4, and this is more than enough to give you a lot of power to complete your first assignment on a very easy way. And I would like to start with mesh distribute. The distribute node is the first one you will see when you start using mesh. It's the default node that mesh includes with every single network. If you create a network, by default, you're going to create a distribute, okay? So if you select here, not the main node, but if you select the main node, you can access this guy clicking here. Or if you click here, you're going to jump straight to the mesh distribute, okay? First of all, we have the number of points. The number of points is the number of copies that mesh is going to do for you. Of course, we have to set the space and then the number of copies. So imagine that you are doing some sort of, I don't know, a domino, whatever. You just have to set one piece to start, you know, and use the distribute node, and then mesh is going to copy like a bunch of copies for you, and you have to increase the space. And by the way, if you go to the end, you will see, okay, 100 is the maximum. Not necessarily. So you can include more if you want. You can go far beyond this slider. You can put here a huge space, like a huge space, and you will see a huge amount of copies for you on your scene. Okay, just so you know, you can go far beyond this thing. And the second thing you have is this option called the distribution type. So let's go back to 100 with 60, 90, yeah, a little bit more, maybe 120. So we have this thing on your scene right now. If we go to the mesh distribute and change from linear to radial, you see that mesh tries to align this thing on a radial way. So if we decrease the amount, you will see the potential of this thing, right? And by the way, you can play with the radius, with the angle. You can play with the offset as well, and you can create this type of thing, for example. So it's quite interesting. And you can play with a lot of other things, a lot of other intriguing things. So for example, you can go to ramps here, and you can use ramps. By the way, I'm going to explain more about ramps when we talk about texturing. But you can play with those ramps to kind of mess with the, for example, the scale of the objects, you know. So right now he's ignoring the ramps, but you can play with those graphics here to kind of affect the way the copies have been made. So you can achieve a lot of randomness here. If you want to delete points, you just have to click here. Okay, and everything is going back to normal. If you click here, you will see this guy a little bit bigger, and you can have like smooth interpolation, for example. Things starts like kind of small and going to amplify with the distance. Okay, and you can literally change the behavior of the things, just changing the curves, which is pretty cool. And we can even animate those parameters, which is something that you can do in the future if you are interested in motion graphics, which is something I like very much. That's why I like this tool so much. But that's the thing, I'm not using for animation, I'm using just for creating randomness on the object. And if you want, and if you think, oh, okay, I can't do more than that. If you want, you can create new meshes from this mesh, you know, and you can create new networks, and you can replicate this thing several times if you want. So for example, I just added another networks. That's the first one, that's the second one, and on the second one, mesh tries to add another distribute node for me, and with this distribute node I can kind of play with this, the number of things I have. And I think you already saw the potential of this tool. It's even more powerful than the other options that we have, because you can play with scale, you can play with rotation to have like crazy distributions on your objects. Of course, I would recommend not to kind of scale the objects, but as you can see, it's fairly easy to create randomness just using slides and just playing with different networks. You can create a basic one, and you can take this basic one and create even more crazy things, you know. And I think this is the true potential of this system. Okay, by the way, just so you know, when I created the second network, he take the first network, which is this one, hides the first one, shows the second one. The second one is the calculation of, you know, a bunch of things that he takes from the first one, and he just shows the first one. If you want, you can right mouse button here and go and click delete network. And if you delete the network, you can just work with the first one. You just have to unhide this thing. That's why hide and unhide objects are so important for us. Let's continue exploring this setting here. So for example, if you go here And if you want to add something else, like for example, you can add inside the same network, you can add a replicator. Okay, this is super cool. If you want to add a replicator, you just have to click here, left mouse button, and add replicator node. If you do that, Mesh is going to add this replicator for you, and you can take this replicant here and you can literally amplify or multiply the amount of copies that you have. Okay, and you can work with the offset, and you can work with the positions, right? And you can work with the scale, and we can work with the rotation of the replicants. So you have a lot of things to experiment and a lot of possibilities to create really crazy things. Okay, so far we saw distribute, replicator. I would like to go back a little bit and show this repro node, and just so you know, if you don't understand yet the potential of the system is fairly simple. This repro node is literally feeding the mesh system. The mesh system have a bunch of nodes to use the data that you provide here with this repro node. And when you provide this data with the repro node, Mesh creates this repro mesh object here. Okay. By the way, this guy here have a bunch of history. If you go here, you see I have a huge history. If you duplicate this guy, like Control D, I just duplicate. Okay. And you see that if you duplicate, let me hide the original one. This is just a mesh. This is just a polygonal object. Okay, and if you want, you can even go here and you can delete the network, and Maya is going to delete all the things, but he's going to keep this final thing for you. This is a bunch of cubes, a bunch of things distributed on a crazy way. It would be impossible, or at least very, very difficult to achieve this result without knowing very well how Maya works and without using a system like Mesh to create this thing for us. So we don't even need the original object. The original object who generates all those things is still hidden. So I can select this guy, delete, and I can do whatever I want with this. So for example, one of the things we can do is we saw the separate command. So the separate command, separate objects that already have some sort of separation. What I mean by separation is, for example, this cube is separated from this guy. So they are literally two shells. We call this thing shells inside Maya. Okay. But the cube itself, all the vertices, they are fused together. So this is just one object. If you try to apply, let's go back to modeling. If you try to apply the edit mesh, let's go to the modeling tool. If you go to the mesh and hit separate, you will see that Maya is going to separate all the objects, and all the objects are going to be independent. If you're not seeing the objects here on your outliner, try to remember something extremely important. First of all, you have to go to show, and you have to unselect this thing, or just hit this button here, clear below. And now you're going to see a bunch of things, but you are seeing more than you should. Okay, why? Because inside every single Maya scene, we already have a lot of things. Even without doing almost nothing, we already have a lot of things. So Maya tries to hide those things from us. Okay, you just have to go here and click display tag objects only. So Maya is going to show the default things. And if you open up this hierarchy, you see that Maya have all those objects. You just have to select everything because we have this small history here, and go to edit, delete by type history to get rid of this history. And now you can do whatever you want with all of those objects separated. So this is the basic workflow, but I would like to go back a little bit and explain a little bit more about the distribute mesh node. So I'm here with a completely empty scene, and I would like to start all over again. So let's go to deck objects only, show objects, just mesh nodes. I'm not seeing anything because I don't have any mesh and anything yet. So I just have to go to polymodeling, and I would like to start with my cube again. And with the cube selected, I can go to animation or effects, doesn't matter, and select mesh, create a mesh network. And now I have by default my distribute node here on my object. And if you select the distribute node, as I said, we have this waiter node, and the waiter node is the most important node because it's the first one actually that we start, and inside this guy you can add other nodes. So that's why we have this small hierarchy here. So if you select the mesh distribute node, I talked about the linear, I talked about the number of copies. I'm going to keep 10 as well, but we can have radial, we can have spherical. Spherical nodes is super cool. If you have a bunch of nodes, the Maya is going to organize the nodes on a spherical way for you. It's a way to have like very randomized points. And as I said, you can play with the rotation, with the scale, you can play with all those things. And we have other modes, of course. We have angles, we have a lot of different ways to work with this object. Okay, you can work with the radius, you can work with those things. They are more related with animation, so in this case it doesn't make any sense to work with those, but you can think about anything that can randomize the position of the object. Okay, another way to work with this is going to, we have mesh, we have a lot of other options here. Unfortunately, I will not have a lot of time to explain all of them. I'm just going to explain the basic ones. But if you go to grid, you will see that this guy can allows you to have like a grid of objects. You know, a grid is like a matrix, like this, you know, and you can kind of build things very, very, very fast with this. You can center the distribution. If you center the distribution, Maya is going to consider the center of the word as the pivot point, the most important point, you know, like the center of the first object. And you have seed. Seed is also related with randomness. So some of the nodes, it doesn't make any sense to use seed. Because they are, you know, extremely linear, at least on the way they work. But you can, again, you can amplify those things here. And by the way, in some nodes, it makes a lot of sense to have seeds, okay? And you can create like a lot of objects. Just try to remember, if you populate your scene with a bunch of objects, you are going to notice that eventually your computer is going to start getting slower and slower and slower. Try to remember that. Select the mesh node, okay? Go to mesh, utilities, and you can switch mesh geometry type to a instancer, okay? If you change this thing to a instancer, you see that the distribute node is not going to change at all. So you have the same options, but sometimes I'm going to delete this guy here. Sometimes you will notice that some things, they do not work on a very predictable way, I would say. So you can find some problems. So for example, it's a little bit tricky to get like different sizes if all the objects, they are copies. They are exactly copies of the first one, not physical copies, but like references to the first one. So we talked about instance, we talked about copies. Now you know the difference between them, and eventually you see that working with instancing can give you a lot of, you know, flexibility in the sense of allowing you to manipulate more objects, but at the same time it's going to give you a huge limitation, which is you will find or might find some problems with some specific commands. Okay, so don't worry too much about that. Just think that eventually if you find problems, you can go back to utilities and switch geometry type, and everything goes back to normal. Okay, so try to think about that. I usually work with the mesh type, not instancer. Okay, instead of that, you can also, instead of grid, you can also use, for example, mesh. Okay, if you change to mesh, you'll see that things are not going to change too much. Okay, by the way, things are a little bit crazy here. I'm going back to the beginning. Okay, I'm going to delete this network. Yes, I'm going to select my cube again, and I'm going to add, let me see if I can do that here. I don't know. Delete network. He's going to, no, he's not going to delete, but I can go to mesh, create mesh network. Yes, so you just have to select the cube again, the original one, and go to mesh, create mesh network, or on your shelf, you can click here and you will access this thing. Okay, so let's go back to the distribute, because I would like to show you other things to deal with that. Okay, if you work with mesh, you will notice that Maya is asking you to do something. So for example, let's go back to linear. This is the default. Look at the message on the screen when I change to mesh. Please connect a mesh. Okay, so what Maya is asking here is some sort of mesh, as you can see here, accepts mesh. Okay, so we can input a mesh here. Okay, but how to do that? So first of all, you need a mesh. So if you go to poly modeling, you can take, for example, a torus. Okay, and you will see on your scene, you're not seeing here because we defined mesh as a filter. So he's filtering all the other things. So if you show polygon objects, you are going to see your torus. You are seeing your cube here because the cube is related directly with the system. So that's why you are seeing the P cube here. Okay, but if you are not seeing the other meshes, it's because you are also filtering or preventing mesh to show other things. Okay, so in this case, I just clicked here to show the torus. And what I need to do is, again, I need to put this torus here. So try to remember. If you try to select the torus, click and drag, you will not be able to do that. This is not how Maya works. So in this case, you have to select the node, and you have to use the middle mouse button, middle click, click and drag, do not release, okay? And release here. If you do that, you will see that Maya is using the torus. By the way, I can take the torus here. I can go to the history, to the first input, okay? Not the mesh, whatever. To the first hit, to the first part of the history here, and I can take this radius here and I can make this guy bigger. If you don't understand what is going on, Maya is replicating the objects around my torus. So this is a very cool way to kind of distribute objects on top of other objects. Like imagine the situation, I want to create a small world. And if I want to put a bunch of objects around this small world, like buildings, trees, mountains, I can take all of those objects and I can use the option, let's go back to distribute. I can use the mesh distribution type, and I can input the mesh that is going to serve as a basis. By the way, I can hide this guy if I want, and you will see that Maya is trying to replicate the objects. Okay, I'm going to bring this back. Let's go back here. Let's increase the amount of points, and right now you have this method here. The method is scatter. Okay, if you push along normals, Maya is going to attract or repel the objects a little bit from the surface, taking into consideration the normals of the object. We already talked about normals. Try to remember that. Normals is the direction of a polygon, in this case, the direction of the face, right? So you can also change the method to align objects around, for example, the vertices like this. Okay, if you want more objects, you can put like 500 here, and I think you can see the power of this thing. So for example, if I hide the torus right now, I will see this kind of thing. Okay, and I can go crazy here. I can do things the way I already showed you during the classes. So for example, I can go to the torus here. I can increase the subdivisions axis. For example, if I increase the subdivisions, try to remember Maya is trying to put objects on top of the vertices. So I am increasing the vertices, right? So if I hide the repro mesh here, you will see that we have, let's activate the wireframe on shader. You will see that I have more vertices. If I have more vertices, Maya is going to take the object and position on every single point. Okay, so this is exactly what I'm doing. And I can do, for example, let's go back with this guy. Let's select the torus. If I am on the animation menu, I have access to the deform. You can go here to the non-linear and take, for example, the twist. If you take the twist, you can, by the way, when we create those modifiers, you are not going to see here because we are filtering the thing, right? Let me see if I can bring this guy back. If you clear all, you will see all the objects. You just have to go to DAG objects only, and you will see here the twist handle. Okay, this twist handle, you can rotate this guy like this. Just the twist handle. I'm not touching the torus. This guy is affecting the torus. Okay. By the way, if you don't know who is affecting who, you just have to take a look on the name of the guy, take a look on the torus, you see his name here, twist1. So the torus is being affected by this guy, right? So I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to rotate this thing like 90 degrees. Why am I doing that? Because I want to do something crazy. I want to select this handle here, go to twist, and here I can play with an angle, start angle, and do this kind of thing. So that's the thing. Again, I am distorting my torus, and I am allowing mesh to put things on top. So if I put like 180 here, and oh no, I have to do the opposite, right? Because it's the basic of geometry. So if I do both like this, I'll have this amount of deformation. Right now things are a little bit crazy and random. If you don't want this amount of deformation, like 180 is probably more than enough. And you can have it all. So for example, you can have deformation affecting the torus, and you will use the torus on your mesh network, on your distribute network, to have these objects aligned on the vertices. If you want something even more random, you can, instead of vertices, you can like select random vertices. You will have more randomness. You can use scatter, as I said. So for example, for forests, I would use scatter probably, okay? You can use this calculate rotation. If you do not calculate rotation, everything is going to be on the same direction, the direction of the original piece, okay? If you calculate the direction, every single cube or every single object is going to be aligned with the main one, okay? So, and all of that just using one node, which is the distribute node. So we talked about basically the distribute node, and we also talked about the replicator. You can have like even more complex combinations if you use the replicator. And I would like to talk briefly about this thing here. If you go to mesh repro, so let's suppose that I want to add another geometry to this guy because I don't want to do things with just cubes, okay? If I want to add something else, I can go here and I can add, I don't know, Let's try this one. Okay, I want to add this object to my list, this platonic object to my list. So I just have to go to my, again, let me filter this thing once again to make my life a little bit easier. I just have to go to the repro node, straight to the repro node, and on the repro node here I can add my objects. And the way we add objects is exactly the way I showed you before. So let's also bring the geometry just to see the platonic thing. Okay, so if you go to the repro node, you just have to middle mouse button, click and drag, and you will put this guy here. But right now nothing is happening. Why? Because Mesh needs to know that you want to work with this guy as well. Okay, so in this case I would like to hide this original piece, so I just select, hit H, and then I hide this piece. If you go to the mesh node, to the main mesh node, we have this guy here called ID. As you can see by the icon, the ID is a way to allow me to use other objects. Okay, and he identified that right now on my repro node I have two objects, this one and this one. This is the index 0, this is the index 1. Okay, so I have two nodes. If I add my mesh ID, I just have to go here and put more indexes. So for now, right now I have two indexes. Okay, so he's going to use both geometries to kind of populate my surface. As you can see, this is the way I use multiple geometry. Okay, and I think this is more than enough to create a lot of things. And if you want, you can again experiment with a lot of things. So for example, I can bring the color here just to show how this thing works. Okay, we are going to talk about lighting, materials, and all those stuff next week, so you don't have to worry about this right now. But if you want, you can click here and select whatever. Okay, it's just a flat color, but we can work with this random hue saturation random. If you click here, you will see that we can have like a lot of colors on our objects. Okay, and you can even animate this thing, so it's super cool to have like a bunch of random objects on the scene on top of other objects. So we saw so far, just going back, we saw the default distribute node, we saw the mesh ID. They are super important if you want to use more than one object. And inside the distribute node, we saw like different distributions, linear, radial, spherical, and mesh. Oh, we also saw grid. We saw the replicator. With the replicator, you can replicate meshes or networks of meshes. If you want to really go crazy, you can take a entire mesh like this one here, and you can go to your mesh and you can create a network of this thing. So you have like really a huge amount of things. So for example, the number, the distance, the rotation of the object. So pretty quick you can create like literally a crazy amount of things. Okay, just try to remember that at the end, if you want, you can take this mesh as the result. This is, by the way, still connected with the mesh system. Okay, if you want to use this thing on a separate way, if you want to apply different materials, if you want to have some sort of control over this network, you have to first duplicate this object. If you duplicate, you will have just the mesh. Okay, and after that you can separate the mesh. You can go here to the modeling toolkit, use the command separate. We already saw that, and you will have literally a lot of individual objects. But pay attention to that. My machine right now is extremely slow, takes a lot of time to calculate, so Think about that. If you don't need the mesh networks anymore, in that case I don't need, because I have like a bunch of objects here. You can go here and you can delete the networks. Maya is going to take out of the scene those things for you. You can delete the network and you are good to go. Okay, so you don't have to worry about those objects anymore, just with the final result, which, by the way, I already have like billions of objects. Okay, so be careful with that, because this can be a little bit complicated. So without putting effort, I have 2,500 objects on my scene. On a very fast way, on a very randomized way. Okay, so I hope you enjoy. I hope you like this system. Mesh is super cool and super fun, and you can also create animations in the future with the system. So I hope you have a lot of fun on your first assignment. Okay, see you in the classes. Bye bye.